Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Welcome to our Monday Night Truth and Liberty live cast. I'm Andrew Womack, and I've got Richard Harris with me. He is the director of Truth and Liberty. I got that without a single glitch tonight. And tonight we have a great guest with us, Roland Warren. We'll give him a better introduction later, but we want you to participate and be a part of this, and so you can actually send in questions, and I think you will have a lot of questions. We're going to be talking about abortion and the pregnancy centers and really a whole approach to how dealing with things, not just stopping abortion, but how to deal with the problem. And I think you'll have some good questions. So Richard will give you that information, and also we got some meetings coming up and a giveaway.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you, Andrew, and it's going to be a good show tonight. Listen, if you're watching us tonight on YouTube, I want to encourage you to watch us directly on our website at truthandliberty.net, because YouTube has this tendency to censor people when they don't like what they say. So,
are we back on? We were censored last time.
Well, a few weeks ago we got censored, so you never know when they're going to disagree with you. But if you, speaking of the website, I wanted to mention, Andrew, we've got some new resources up there that I wanted to alert people to. One of them is Twitter Files infographic. So you know Elon Musk has been releasing all these documents on various issues and things that used to be called conspiracies. Now we know they're true. Yeah. But you can get an infographic on our website there that'll help you study that and be informed. Also, a link to help you talk to your friends and neighbors or people that might be even struggling in this area on the LGBT issue. It's called changedmovement.com, so check out that resource on our website. Andrew's got some meetings coming up that you definitely want to know about. The first up is the Orlando Gospel Truth Conference on February 9th. If you live in Florida or even anywhere close to there, that'd be a great event for you to go to. You're going to be ministering with
Ashley and Carly Teradez.
Ashley and Carly Teradez. Do people know their story? I guess a lot of your folks
do. You know, I did a radio interview in Lubbock, Texas today, and the doctor there, that's what turned him on. Somebody gave him that video.
Is that right?
And he's a medical doctor, but when he saw that she got totally healed of something that it was impossible to be healed of by medicine, that really opened his heart up.
That's amazing. It's a fantastic story. Ashley and Carly's daughter, what was she, 7 years old, 8 years old?
No, somewhere? She was 3.5 years old, and
okay.
She was the size of a 9-month-old.
Wow.
She was
on
dying.
The verge of death, right?
And she just had her first baby. She's now 19 or 20, and she just had a child this last month.
Anyway, if you're in the area, you need to go to the Orlando Gospel Truth Conference, February 9th. You can register for that on awmi.net/events. And also the Men's Advance, annual Men's Advance is coming up March 9th through the 11th. And Andrew's going to be ministering along with Tony Dungy, and Billy Epperhart's on the speaking schedule, so that's going to be a fantastic event. Tony Dungy is a Super Bowl winning coach, a strong believer. What a witness for Christ he is. So mark your calendars for that. And then March 15th through the 17th is Campus Days at Charis Bible College. And this event always tugs at my heart, because I remember when we came to Campus Days so many years ago, and God transformed our life. And so if you hear God calling you to something bigger, something greater, more of Him, or a destiny, there's nowhere better for you to be than Campus Days, and let God speak to you to that at that. Also, if you're not a subscriber to Truth and Liberty, if you don't get our weekly emails, we actually send out several a week. And what we're doing in these emails, folks, is we're trying to equip you, to give you the resources and information you need to be an advocate for truth in the public square. All you got to do is go on our website and click subscribe, share your email address with us, and you'll start getting that valuable information. And if you do, we'll put your name in the hat to receive a free drawing for one of Andrew's products. Last week we gave away Andrew's book, Lessons from David. Wow, that's an awesome book. And James McKinney, congratulations, you're the winner of that. So you'll be getting information about how you can claim that free gift. This week we're giving away financial stewardship. This is Andrew's teaching on what the Bible says about prosperity and stewardship. And I want to tell you, I remember when I watched this so many years ago, Andrew, and I was so impressed with the balanced nature of Andrew's teaching on this, because it's not just God wants you rich, which he does, but that there's another part of this, which is stewardship. And you want to get that today, then subscribe to Truth and Liberty and you'll be eligible to receive that. Also, like Andrew mentioned, this is an interactive broadcast. We want to hear from you today. So comments or questions, just post them there in the chat function or in the comment box on Facebook, and we'd love to hear from you. And then we have great plans here at Truth and Liberty. Let me tell you, we are transforming the state of Colorado and America. God is using Truth and Liberty all over the place. It's amazing. People come up to me, Andrew, and say, oh, I watch you every week, and you're making a big impact. And if you want to be a part of that, about turning America back to God, back to biblical values, and to our Christian heritage, then you can do that just by becoming a member of Truth and Liberty. Go to the donate button on our website. All you have to do is sign up to make a gift of $5 or more, recurring automatic contribution, and you'll be a Truth and Liberty member. And when you do, we'll send you this booklet in the mail. And this is a copy of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and Andrew's Declaration of Dependence upon God and His Holy Bible. And we'll send that as a free gift to you today. Just remember, gifts to Truth and Liberty Coalition are not tax deductible because we're a 501c4. But we also have a C3 arm, which is Truth and Liberty Foundation. And if you need tax credit for your gift, you can give there, and we appreciate your generosity. That's truthandliberty.foundation. Last thing I want to mention is prayer. If you want someone to agree with you in prayer tonight, Andrew has literally a room full of 24/7 Spirit-filled, Word of God trained prayer ministers who are standing there ready to agree with you in prayer. So just call in 719-635-1111, and they will agree with you in prayer tonight.
And right before I introduce Roland, Truth and Liberty is getting a lot of traction, and people are beginning to recognize the impact it's having. And so just this last week, Richard was able to go to a meeting. I don't know if I should mention who called it, but some of the leaders, conservative leaders in the body of Christ, and they called together just people to have a think tank. What can we do about things? And they asked us to be a part of it. So it's making a difference.
Yes, we are. It was an honor to be there, and it, you know, I tell you, it was encouraging to see all these people committed to life and to Christian principles in our culture, and it was a great opportunity for us to be there and share and be a part of that.
That's awesome.
Yep.
And so our guest tonight is Roland Warren, and he is a Princeton graduate. He also graduated from Wharton School of Business. He also the University of Pennsylvania. Roland, I went to 6 months of college. So here I am interviewing somebody who's a Princeton graduate, and I can barely spell Princeton.
Well,
that's all right.
And then his kids also have graduated from Harvard. He's been a businessman, and he is now the CEO, I believe, of CareNet. And we're going to be interviewing him tonight and talking about what CareNet is and what they're doing. So, Roland, thank you for joining us. He's joining from Virginia by Zoom, and welcome. Thank you for being a part of this tonight.
Well, delighted to be with you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to you.
So tell us a little bit about you first, and then how you got involved with CareNet, and then what is CareNet? People may not have heard about it.
Sure. Yeah. So as they heard, you know, I went to Princeton undergrad, and you know, I think probably one of the things that's really connected to my work here with CareNet is that what's not in the bio is that when I was a junior at Princeton, and I got my girlfriend pregnant. She was a sophomore. I was a junior, and we faced an unplanned pregnancy. And when she went to Student Health Services to get the pregnancy test, you know, the nurse administered the test and came out and said it's positive, and without taking an extra gulp of air, said, "Now, of course, you're going to have an abortion." And my girlfriend, and now my wife, actually, 40 years, I'll give you a little bit of a punchline.
Praise God, it turned out good.
Yes. Said, "No, I want to have my baby. I want to get married." And she says, "Well, you know, how are you going to graduate from Princeton with a baby? And what do you want to do when you graduate?" "Well, I want to become a doctor," she says. And she said, "How are you going to become a doctor with a baby?" And, you know, she kind of came back to the dorm and, you know, kind of told me this. And, you know, we just said, well, we're going to move forward with with the plan. We didn't want to complicate one bad decision, one sin with the second sin. So that's what we did. We got married, and she did end up graduating from Princeton, but not with one baby, but actually with two, because it's Princeton, so we got to overachieve.
There you go.
So
There you go.
we had our second son there as well, and then she went on and became a doctor, and has been practicing medicine for over 30 years. And that kid that that they encouraged us to throw in a trash can went to Harvard, and smarter than both of us. So we've really seen God's faithfulness in the midst of all of this. So that perspective is one that really, in a lot of ways, informs what I do today, because I went on to work in the corporate world, for IBM, Pepsi, and Goldman Sachs. But when I was at Goldman, God called me to go to the National Fatherhood Initiative, which works on the fatherhood issue, and it really was kind of an amazing opportunity, because I'd grown up without a dad. My mother actually was a teen mom, became pregnant when she was 16, 17 with my brother, and then had me when she was 19, and then by the time she was 23, had 4 kids under the age of 8, and my dad was gone. So I kind of dealt with and wrestled with the father absence issue, became a father fairly early in life, and then God called me from the business world to work on that issue full time, had me on a couch for about 12 years working through my own fatherhood issue, and really gave me a voice and helped me see how important the fatherhood issue is to, and the impact that it has, rather, on some of the most intractable social ills. But while I was there...
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me like that if you hadn't have been there for your girlfriend, and if you hadn't have been involved, that she might have chosen an abortion. So that shows you how important fatherhood is. Well,
it's interesting that you would say that, because, by God's grace, we made this decision, and I don't say that to brag on anything, but it's nip and tuck there. I mean, one of the reasons why women have abortions is very much tied to what happens with the guy. I call him the first responder. When she tells him that she's pregnant, then there's a pregnant pause, and how he responds has a tremendous impact on the trajectory of the pregnancy. In fact, one of the things that we learned here was that we did a national survey of men who, women rather, who participated in abortion, who had abortions, and we asked them a couple of questions. One was, who did you talk to about your abortion decision? And we gave them a long list, their mother, their best friend, a medical professional, the father of the baby, all of that. Number one was the father of the child. And then we asked them, who was the most influential in your decision to abort? Guess who it was? The father of the child. Wow. We did the same survey with Lifeway and did it with a post-abortive men. And what we found was, asking the same question, who did she talk to about the abortion decision? And the guy says, me, more than anybody else. And then we said, who was the most influential? And he said, me. So you have the woman who had the abortion, the guy who participated in the abortion, both saying that the guy is the most influential in that decision. And one of the sort of aha moments, certainly because of that perspective I had on the fatherhood issue when I came to this work, was that in large measure, for 40 plus years, as we've worked on this life issue, we actually have not included the guy in the discussion. We've actually built a movement that actually doesn't have an on-ramp for the guy, and that's a central part of CareNet's ministry model, because we think it's critically important for the man to be involved in that. And I can say, just from a personal standpoint, when my wife was facing this pregnancy, for the first 5 months, there was one person who knew she was pregnant other than her, and it was me. So I certainly, although it was her body and her choice legally and practically, the reality is that the decision that I made impacts that choice. And so we really need to be calling out to men in a very specific way and reaching out to them to encourage them to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of them. And that's a critical part of CareNet's ministry model. And unfortunately, it's a critical part that I believe has been missed in a big, big way in terms of the work that we've done around this issue.
And Roland, if I'm not mistaken, I think 86% of all abortions done in 2021 were done by single women. And of course, every
Absolutely.
One of those had a man involved, contrary to what some of the transgenders and
Yes.
people are saying, that men can get pregnant. We know better. And so men are, the vast majority of these abortions are done because of the absence of the man or either the man supporting her desire for an abortion. So you reach the men, that's a significant way to deal with this problem.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why the other side wants to frame this as her body and her choice. In other words, they want to isolate her from others because the man has such an important impact. And one of the things that really guided me at CareNet in terms of this whole perspective was actually looking at the birth of Christ, which is the most celebrated unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective. You've got Mary, who is facing an unplanned pregnancy. She had hopes and dreams for her life and her life with Joseph that did not include a child at this time and in this way. The angel comes to her, gives her this news. And, and it's interesting because when I thought through that, I said, you know what, my wife had a similar dynamic to Mary, not the way she got pregnant, but the practical reality of what it meant for her after she was pregnant. Yep. How am I going to tell, the guy? What's my father going to say? What's my mother going to say? All of this swirling in her head. But what Mary did was, instead of focusing on the uncertainty of what she didn't know, she focused on the certainty of what she did know. There was a life growing inside of her, and it wasn't a life worth sacrificing, but a life worth sacrificing for. And she said, let it be unto me as you have said. So when I started with CareNet, it really gave me this insight anchored in the first chapter, the first book of the New Testament, that essentially what we're trying to encourage women to do is to ascribe to themselves the virtue and the character of Mary. Despite the uncertainty of what they don't know, focus on the certainty of what they do know. Now, for a lot of folks, that's kind of where they close their Bible. They say, okay, I got it. What we're supposed to be trying to do is help the proverbial Marys and save the proverbial Jesuses. But you got to keep reading. What did God do to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy wasn't a crisis pregnancy? Well, he sent an angel to Joseph. And Joseph was a man with a plan. He was a righteous man, but he had a plan. And his plan, if you think about it in a cultural context, was basically a cultural version of an abortion of that day. Because since you couldn't put the baby away, you put the woman and the baby away. And Joseph was going to divorce her quietly. And the angel comes to him and says, listen, man, I know you're a man with a plan, but I got a new plan for you, man, and it is this. I want you to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. And Joseph, like Mary, says essentially, let it be unto me as you have said. And when Herod wants to kill Jesus and Mary's at risk, who does the angel go to? Once again, goes to the man. One man, two missions, husband to her, father to the child growing inside of her. One man, two missions, to provide and to protect. So in God's economy, there's always been a role for men. When there's an unplanned pregnancy, it's to step into that role. And one of the key things that God's kind of put on my heart and CareNet's ministry model, which folks can find at care-net.org, as part of this whole abundant life perspective, is that we've got to be focused on engaging men, because a core part of the response to the life issue, it's not just the sanctity of life issue. There's another issue that's connected to it, which is the sanctity of marriage and family. Because the first thing that the angel told Joseph was, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. In other words, he affirmed the sanctity of marriage and family consistent with God's design before he even told him who Jesus was. And Jesus came into the world consistent with God's design that accomplished his purpose without violating this principle of how children come into the world. Jesus came into a covenant relationship, a marriage that had not been consummated, that accomplished God's purpose of bringing the Savior into the world, but didn't violate the principle, the high idea that he has for how children should come into the world. And I believe that we've kind of lost that narrative in our Christian response to the life issue. And when you look at the fact that 86% of the women that have abortions are unmarried, you're not going to solve the life issue without also addressing the marriage and family issue. And you're not going to be able to solve the marriage and family issue unless you do like God did and you pursue the man. He sent an angel to Joseph, sent an angel to Mary, equal call, different mission, and he used their humanity, her to have the child, him to guide and to protect and provide. And so that's a core to kind of what we do at CareNet in our ministry approach.
Well, that's very good. And before you got with CareNet, by reading your biography, you had a ministry to men, and you wrote a book, what, Bad Dads of the Bible? What is that about?
Yes, the Bad Dads of the Bible, 8 mistakes that every man can avoid. So, yes, I absolutely did.
And so tell us about CareNet. What is the ministry of CareNet, and how many pregnancy centers do you have associated with you, things like that?
Absolutely. Well, CareNet's a ministry. It started in 1975. It actually started as something called the Christian Action Council. It was started by Francis Schaeffer, C. Everett Koop, and a theologian named Harold O.J. Brown, and Billy Graham was involved as well, and was really on trying to get more Protestants, evangelicals involved in the life issue. And so initially it was kind of started to be probably more on the advocacy side, but as more and more Christians started putting pregnancy centers in communities, that became an issue, and it became a support mechanism. And Christian Action Council created a ministry called the CareNet, which then became contracted to CareNet, and eventually in the late 80s transitioned from actually focus on the advocacy part of the life issue to the care part. And so now we have a network of over 1,200 pregnancy centers across the country that are focused on offering compassion, hope, and help to women and men at risk for abortion. So as I said, a core part of our ministry model is really meeting that woman at her point of need, but we want to engage the guy as well through our pregnancy center network. So an increasing number of our centers now have a ministry component also to the man and to the woman. But there's some other aspects of what we do that I think are really important, particularly for your listeners. One of the real challenges around the life issue is that Christians don't view the life issue too often through the lens of discipleship. We either think about it through political engagement or through material support. And both of those things are important. But the life issue is not primarily either one of those things, because every good work that Christians do should lead to discipleship. Water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothes for the naked, homes for the homeless. Christians understand that those are on-ramps to discipleship. But compassion for the pregnant has been set outside the church, and as opposed to inside the church as a core ministry of the church. So one of the realizations we had early on was that we have to be thinking about this issue through a discipleship lens, which means that women need to be able to move from pregnancy centers to the church for ongoing support and discipleship. And so the second kind of pillar of our work, God's design for family through the pregnancy centers, is God's call to discipleship based on the Great Commission, right? So you can see what I'm doing here. First chapter, the first book of the New Testament, God's design for family. Last chapter, the first book of the New Testament, God's call to discipleship. So I tell folks all the time, when you see someone facing a pregnancy decision, your first thought should be not who should I vote for so she can't get an abortion, or what kind of material support does she need. I think your first thought from a Christian perspective is she a disciple of Jesus Christ? The child growing inside of her needs to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. The guy who got her pregnant needs to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And when you view it that way, it becomes the core work of the church, the good works that we as Christians do that lead to discipleship, which is the Great Commission. And in the discipleship framework, yes, you are involved in providing material support. Yes, you are politically engaged. But like when Jesus got that coin and was asked, should we pay taxes? What did he say? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, unto God what is God's. Well, what did Caesar care about? Material, wealth, and political power. And Christ framed that under discipleship, because you can be a disciple maker. You can't be a disciple maker without meeting the needs of those who have needs. 1 John 3:17 says that. And you can't be a disciple maker without engaging the government, which tends to be harmful and unmerciful, particularly to the most vulnerable. So as people of the book, we have a responsibility to engage, but it's under the framework of discipleship. That's the higher thing. And the life issue needs to be part of that. Water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothes for the naked. Well, compassion for the pregnant needs to be part of that. And there needs to be a ministry component in the church that helps the church see this issue primarily through the lens of discipleship.
Well, this is really close to my heart. Back in the early 80s, the Lord told me that he was going to hold me accountable if I didn't do something. And I didn't want to go picket. And so what I did, I started 6 pregnancy centers and supported them with $15,000 or more per month for 20 years. So
wow, that's it.
We're doing a lot of stuff, and these pregnancy centers, as you know, they do more than just give pregnancy tests and tell people that there's an alternative to abortion. They supply clothes, training, what do they call it, sonograms, everything that pregnancy needs, and even after birth, they still support them with all of those kind of things. So that's an alternative. And instead of cursing the darkness, you turn it on a light. That's what CareNet's doing.
Roland. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was curious. At this event that I was at last week, one of the big topics of discussion was how do we get the pro-life movement more connected to the church and churches to the pro-life movement in exactly what you're saying, in an action sense, not just viewing it as a political issue. Oh, I'm pro-life, that means I vote for pro-life candidates. But how does the church get engaged to actually do something to help disciple, to care for mothers and fathers that are facing unplanned pregnancies? And do you have resources on that? I know we've discussed that in the past. Can you highlight some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I partnered with Dr. Tony Evans on creating a resource called Making Life Disciples. And the goal of Making Life Disciples is to train small groups in the church, because many churches have small groups. And often our small groups can be about us loving us. But what if our small groups became about us loving them? And your small group got trained so that you could walk alongside someone who was facing a pregnancy decision. So the pregnancy center has the ability to refer that client to the church for ongoing support and discipleship. And there's a ministry in the church that will walk alongside that person. Frankly, and you want to do it as early as possible. Like from conception to birth, you want to be in the conversation then, because even if she doesn't make the life decision, right? You still need to be there to restore her, because the goal is for her to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, and the guy to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, and her children to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. If we don't do this, what we end up with is basically a cycle of pregnancy centers doing evangelism, which leads to a conversion. But if we send them back to the culture, which is a disciple maker, that delinks fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage, and God's designed for those things, well, we shouldn't be surprised when we see her back. And too often what we do is we see her back. I call it the 18-18 rule. We see her in 18 months with a new pregnancy and a new guy, or we see her daughter in 18 years or someone her son got pregnant in 18 years. That person needs to be transitioned to the church for ongoing support and discipleship. But in most churches, there's not a ministry designed to receive that person. Coupled with the fact that 54% of those who have abortions profess to be either Catholic or Protestant. And that survey that I talked about with women and men, we found that 4 out of 10 women and 5 out of 10 men were attending church at least monthly at the time of their first abortion. Now, if someone in the typical church takes a pregnancy test in the morning, a woman takes a pregnancy test and it's positive, but it's not good news for her, what you have to ask yourself in most churches, who should she talk to? Yeah. Most churches, I mean, who should she talk to? There's 9 days from the time a woman confirms her pregnancy until she either has an abortion or scheduled one. And with the abortion pill, it's getting condensed. So if she doesn't know who she needs to talk to, because the church doesn't have a ministry on-ramp to receive her or to retrieve her from a pregnancy center, then Planned Parenthood can look like a compassionate alternative to us. Because I guarantee you this, if you go do it in your congregation. I ask people give index cards out and say, woman got pregnant, who should she talk to? And see if you get the same name. Now, do that in a room full of Planned Parenthood folk. They're going to write 1-800, like they're going to write the number down. They're going to know. So we have an issue in the church because we don't have a ministry component in the church. And my view is part of the reason we don't have a ministry component in the church, that's the what. And the why to that is because we don't view it through the lens of discipleship. I was talking to a group of pastors. We had the first ever pro-life men's conference, March of 2022, and we're going to have our next one March 3rd and 4th in Dallas at Dr. Tony Evans Church, and folks can go to our website to learn. Men can go to our website to learn how to do that. But I was talking to a group of pastors, about 80 pastors, and I asked them this question. I said, how many of you became pastors because you wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade? These are pro-life pastors. Nobody raised their hands. I said, how many became pastors because you wanted to end abortion in your lifetime? No hands. Then I asked, how many of you became pastors because you felt called to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and to make disciples for Jesus Christ? Every hand in the room shot up. What does that tell you? That if pastors don't view this issue primarily as a discipleship issue, then guess what? It's not connected inside the church. It's the core ministry of the church. And if pastors don't view it that way, then they don't preach about it that way, which means congregants don't view it that way. And into that void steps political engagement and material support, when the reality is it's viewing it as a discipleship issue, the same way that all good work should be viewed. It's what anchors it in the church and mobilizes the church to respond in the way that we need to, not just in a post-Roe environment, in a pre-Roe environment. We've always should have been responding this way because it's a good work that leads to discipleship.
So let me ask you, if there's a pastor or a church leader watching this, and if they say, well, man, do you have resources that we could, instead of having to invent it, you've already invented this, that we could take your resources? Do you have that on your website?
Absolutely. You need to just go to makinglifedisciples.com, makinglifedisciples.com. And when you go to that website, all the resources are there. And essentially, they're designed so that these small groups in your church can then be trained to come alongside someone who's facing a pregnancy decision. A good way for pastors to think about this is, a lot of times in the church, we'll send folks out on a missions trip, right? But we will never do that without them getting cross-cultural training, right? Because you're going into a new culture. Well, a woman who is about to abort her baby, and the guy who's supporting that actually is a perspective that most parents, would never, you may have had some tough years in the teen years, but parents have not seriously considered killing one of their children. It's a place that you've never been.
Well, I'm not sure that's totally true.
There was that
We might have a higher response on that.
But at least they knew it was wrong to do it.
Right.
Right, but seriously, right? So this woman who's considering abortion, the guy who's supporting it, they are telling, if you will, the one who's going to kill their baby, where to find them. Just think through that. That's a place that you haven't been. So to engage someone who's in that state of mind, you need cross-cultural training. You're going into a foreign land. Making Life Disciples is the resource that helps you do that. And the other key piece to this is that you've got to be thinking about this issue in the context of the Great Commandment. The Great Commandment is about loving God and loving your neighbor and loving yourself, right? That's the Great Commandment. And when Jesus was asked that question by the lawyer, right, and by others, he said, what is it? Love God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, as you know well, that the word for love that's used there is agapeo in the Greek, which is a sacrificial love. And neighbor in the Greek means near one. So essentially, it's about helping her live out the Great Commandment, to love the near one growing inside of her, because there's no one nearer to a woman who's pregnant than the child growing inside of her. It's her nearest near one. There is no one nearer to that man who got her pregnant than the child growing inside the woman. So this issue is anchored in the Great Commandment of us to love our neighbor as ourselves, and helping people understand that in the church, especially, that's what the call of this work is. And then it's anchored to the Great Commission, because we're called to make disciples and to teach them to obey all that Christ taught us. And what did Christ teach us? He distilled it down. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And if they don't understand that, then what ends up happening is this sacrificial love that we're supposed to have for that vulnerable neighbor, near one, becomes a sacrificing love, where we sacrifice that near one for ourselves. So this is an issue that's anchored firmly in the gospel of Jesus Christ, in the words of Jesus Christ, and in the life of Jesus Christ, in his birth, in the Great Commandment, and the Great Commission. And that's why Making Life Disciples is so important, because it mobilizes you to live out the Great Commandment, because you're loving your neighbor as you help her love her neighbor and help him love his neighbor in terms of the child growing inside of them. So this is absolutely a gospel-focused ministry perspective that the church must lead on. And that's part of the reason that we do the work that we do.
So let me ask my staff to put that up on the screen, makinglifedisciples.com, because, man, this is a resource that a person who's a pastor or a leader in a church needs to have available, because as that stat you were sharing, I think it was 54%, wasn't it, of the women that have abortions attend church at least monthly?
Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
So, absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why Dr. Evans was so helpful. He has a pregnancy center that's connected to his church. But most churches don't have a pregnancy center. Many of them can't even afford it. But you do have small groups of people who can come alongside folk and love them and help them understand how to apply the gospel of Jesus Christ to the decision that they're making if they're in the church but also the folks outside the church to actually retrieve those folks to help them become disciples for Jesus Christ. And I would say another way, a great way to think about this is that, see, Jesus had all these people who came to him with different needs. This one has, too many husbands. This one has too much blood. This one has too many demons. This one has too much pride. This one has too much money. And what did he do with every single one of those people? He met them at their point of need, and then he called them into a discipleship relationship. Well, this woman is presenting with her need is what? She has a pregnancy, right? And what are we supposed to do? Meet her at her point of need. Yes, physical, emotional, spiritual, right? Physical, emotional, meet her at her point of need, but then call her into a discipleship relationship. That's not something that social services will do. That's not something that the culture will do, right? If she comes to social services with 2 kids that she's struggling to support and then pregnant with a third, they give her whatever services, but they're not asking her how she's living. They don't do like Jesus said, call your husband. They don't do that, right? They don't tell you this one thing you lack. What they do is they say, come as you are, stay as you came. But Christ didn't say that. His essential message was come as you are, but don't stay as you came. Be transformed by a renewing of your mind. And the transforming institutions that God has designed are his design for family, which are covenant relationships. Those transform, and God's call to discipleship, which is a covenant relationship with God. Do you see? So this is all anchored in God's word. So I'm getting worked up here.
Well, I really like what you're saying. And one of the things that I love is that a lot of people think it's love and compassion to love them as they are and leave them as they are. But that's not the way that Christ did. He loved them so much, he didn't want them to stay in that destructive lifestyle. And that's excellent, what you just said.
Yes, absolutely. And you see that all the way through Scripture, because the story of the rich young ruler and the story at the woman at the well, which for me was one of the first narratives that Christ gave me when I started doing this work, because what I realized is that the woman at the well yesterday is the woman at the pregnancy center or the abortion clinic today. Why is she there? Well, she's tied to her no husband problem. And Jesus went right there, right? Right? So she thought this was going to be a transactional conversation with Jesus, like about bottled water or something. I'm going to dig you a well or something, And he was like, no. This is about transformation. And when did she have the transformation? When he told her, call her husband. Then it was like, sir, what did he do? He stepped into that covenant relationship that she had missed. She'd longed to be a bride, and she'd met the ultimate bridegroom. And the source of her pain was the source of her healing. He went there, right? And then she goes she's in mission. Why was she at the well, the hottest part of the day, alone, at risk? Why? Because of her no husband problem. And so he didn't want to just leave her there with bottled water, right? Or a tap. He said, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And she went in mission, left her jug there, went back to town because she had been transformed. The rich young ruler, it's exactly the same story. Right? He comes to Jesus and he's like, this one thing you lack. Well, his jug was his money, and it was stopping him from being in mission. And that's why he went away sad and probably mad over time, right? But Jesus always did that. He said, look, you have to love folks. And I think one of the things that Christians at times we get confused by, the Bible says they will know us by our love, but it doesn't say they will love us for our love. See, we're not responsible for what people do with the love that we have for them. Some, like the woman at the well, will be transformed, but some, like the rich young ruler, will reject. But we are called to love. We are called to love, and we're called to love in that sacrificial way, especially for the most vulnerable, right? And so that's really the call that we have. It's actually anchored in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And my hope and prayer is that we as Christians get mobilized around this issue the way that we need to be and see it fully as an on-ramp and an opportunity to make disciples for Jesus Christ, which is really why I believe that God sends these folks to us anyway.
And as important as stopping the murder of innocent children is, which I'm not undercutting that at all, 86% of all the women that get abortions are not married. If we were to peel back a layer and just start teaching morality, and if they wouldn't have sex outside of marriage, did you know in 21, I believe it was, there was 1.2 million babies aborted in the United States, and over 1 million of them could have been saved if women would not have had sex outside of marriage. So here's the thing that's critical, and I always like to tell people this so they don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that every woman that gets pregnant has to marry the guy that got her pregnant. I understand that's not practical or impossible in many situations. Here's what I am saying: that if a woman comes to you that's facing a pregnancy decision, right?
And the reason she's there is because she's dealing fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage, and God's designed for those things. And so if you minister to her and you don't relink those things consistent with God's design, you can expect to see her back, right? Because you haven't given her what God has given the church to give for, which is the truth.
Yeah. It's
right?
not dealing with the root of the problem.
That's right.
A lot of people are using abortion like birth control, but the real problem is that they don't have any morals. They need to.
And that's it. And we're called as people of the book to actually communicate that. That's why they need to come to us. So that's why I resist like a social services model that says, well, we just want to make sure he has a baby. I mean, just think about this just from a biblical perspective, right? And this is why I make a distinction between being pro-life and being pro-abundant life. And the reason I say this, if a woman comes to you and she has a baby, is pregnant, has the baby, brings it into the world, that's a pro-life woman. Yep. Okay, now she comes to you with another guy and a different baby, another baby, that's a pro-life. So she's got 3 babies with 3 different guys. That's all pro-life. But that's not Christianity, because that's come as you are, stay as you were, right? So is that really what we should be called to? I think that we should be trying to do what? We should be trying to help her transform her life and communicate a value set to her children that's different from the one that she's been living out. And the only one who has that value set, right, is the church. We have God's design for family and God's call to discipleship. That was the saving grace for me. I grew up in a single mother home. Most of my aunts were single mothers. Many of my cousins were single mothers. And that was the life that I lived. Now, when I got my girlfriend pregnant, the thought of being a baby daddy didn't even enter my head. Why? Because I went to church. And I saw Pastor Cup being a husband to his wife and a father to his children. And I saw all these men within the body of Christ modeling something that I wasn't seeing at home. And so when I was, as a little black boy growing up in that environment, because my mother sent me to church, the thought of being a baby daddy and not a husband and a father never even connected with me. You see? So if you're sending her back to a community where she's been to more baby showers than wedding showers, then that transformation doesn't happen. That's why the church being connected to pregnancy centers is so critical, and the church seeing those folks in the pregnancy centers as members of churches that just don't know it yet, and retrieving those folks to help them be transformed is so critical if you're going to break the intergenerational cycle of abortion. God's design for family, God's call to discipleship. That's the mission of the church.
That's very good, Roland. I've really enjoyed this. I bet we got some questions here, don't we?
We do have some questions.
We need to leave some time for that. I think Roland could preach. If
I think
encourage him a little bit.
For sure. Roland, one of our viewers wants to know, this is a good one. They want to know about your Bad Dads book. They want to, if you can talk about one of the bad dads of the Bible, just give an example of poor fathering and what we can learn from that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's bad dads of the Bible, 8 mistakes every good dad can avoid. There's only 8 I checked, not 9 or 10. You master these 8, you're good. And so basically what I did was I looked at men in the Bible through the lens of fatherhood specifically. And so men like Lot, Abraham, David, through the lens of fatherhood. And there were mistakes that each one of them made that God left there unvarnished, because the view is wise men learn from their mistakes, but the wisest learn from the mistakes of others. Amen. And so one of the ones that really inspired me was Abraham and his bad dad mistake of abandoning his son. Most people think about Abraham, they think about Isaac, but he had another son before that, which was Ishmael. And so I kind of walked through the narrative of the impact of that, and that was it was basically trying to help you avoid being that kind of father who abandons his kid. And I understand God's design and all of that, but he stepped out of God's design when he kind of did what he did, and that's kind of led to that situation. And that was a tough one for me, because I realized when I was writing that chapter that I was Ishmael in many ways with my own dad. I was sort of that one. He went on to a new life and a new family and all that stuff. And so that was a difficult chapter for me to write. But God actually used that chapter for the next book that I wrote, which is Raising Sons of Promise, a guide for single mothers of boys. And I actually took the story of Hagar and Ishmael as an archetype of a single mother raising a son, and was really inspired by this perspective. When you hear the story of Hagar, one of the things that you hear about her is that she found a wife for Ishmael. In other words, this was a single mother who had a perspective of God's design for marriage. And so my call to single mothers out there, is that how you're thinking about your sons? You realize that part of what you need to do is try to help them not just be a good father if that comes in life, but also to be a good husband connected to that. So my second book actually is Raising Sons of Promise, a guide for single mothers of boys. And it kind of talks about my experience as a boy growing up in a single mother home. And it's to help mothers like my mother kind of have some insights around that as well. So God really used that to heal me, but also to give me a message and a perspective for both the fathers out there to avoid that, but also for single mothers in our culture to give them hope and understand that their sons too are sons of promise, in the same way that Ishmael was a son of promise, a different promise than what Hagar had expected, but a promise nonetheless. And so it's a very encouraging book for single moms. So I encourage folk to pick that one up too.
You know, let me interject this. It's not exactly the same, but my dad died when I was 12, so I was raised by a single mother. Yeah. And I never rebelled. I never got hurt by it. And of course, he didn't forsake me. He died, so it's different. But nonetheless, I grew up without a dad, and I meet a lot of single women that just think that they have zero chance of raising a godly child if they don't have a man in the house. And so they'll grab the first male that they find, and to have a bad dad is much worse than having no dad. And so I think what you're saying, Roland, is that single moms are not without hope. With the Lord's help, you can still raise a godly child even without a man in the house. It's not optimal.
And the thing I thought was so beautiful is the fact that that this whole notion of that God sees and God hears, right? Because I believe that Ishmael's name is that God hears. That's what the angel told her, that he sees. There's a God who sees me when she has this interaction with an angel before she goes back to Sarah, and then she's called to name Ishmael his name, which is also this whole perspective. So he is a son of promise. It's a different promise, but there's some lessons that we can learn from him as well. I felt like when I read that story, it really resonated with me, because here you have a boy who's been told by his father that all of this is going to be yours. And then at 13, he's essentially rejected. That can turn somebody into, a donkey of a man, a jackass of a man, which is sort of that. And it's not prescriptive, it's actually descriptive. Because when you wound a boy like that, it can lead to a lot of anger and a lot of issues connected to that. So I kind of walk through all that stuff that I've seen in my own life as well. It's tough when you're rejected by the bone of your bone and flesh of your flesh, so to speak, the one man who's supposed to love you like no other. It can leave a wound that's not easily healed. And that's why I say kids that have a hole in their soul in the shape of their dad, and that God whispers into the wombs of their mothers that there's this guy who should love you like no other. And when he does it, it can leave a wound that's not easily healed. And so part of what I try to do in the book is help her understand that there is a father wound that he has that you need to be aware of. You can help him work through that. And there are resources and ways that you can do that, which I kind of outline in the book, and things that really work for me, and the things I've seen over 12 years of working with fathers, and also as a boy who grew up without a dad, some things that insights God gave me connected to that.
Yeah, Psalms 27:10 says, when your father or mother forsake you, then the Lord will take you up. So that's not an optimum situation, but God can turn anything into something good.
He's the father to the fatherless.
Amen.
Well, Roland, on this whole subject, we got another question here, and in your introduction, your kids are excelling and prospering in life, getting an Ivy League education and all this sort of thing. The question that a lot of people are struggling with today is, how do I, if my kids are in public school, how do I keep godly values in them as they're being indoctrinated? Now, I don't know whether your kids went through public school or not, but what counsel do you have for parents when it comes to educating their children?
Yeah, this, it's not necessarily in my wheelhouse in terms of that, because I had the same challenges as well, because my one son went to Harvard, the other one went to UNC. I mean, these are secular schools, and I went to Princeton, and these are many of these schools, unfortunately, they have a goal of kind of stripping your children of the biblical heritage that you give them, and worldview that you've given them coming in there. I do think that it goes back to the discipleship issue, that we really as parents have to really see our role as disciplers of our children. It's not the role of the children's ministry at your church. It's the role of the parents to be the primary disciplers. And I can look at my own life. Even I had some of that perspective of, well, the youth group is going to help with this or that and the other, and I think I've learned over time that I said, you know what? No, the youth, if you think about it, the role of the youth group really should be, and the role of youth pastors, in my view, and this might be a little controversial to say, but I do what I do. The role of the youth pastor should be about helping the children live out the fifth commandment, to honor their father and their mother, right? That's actually what children are called to do. And youth ministry should be supporting the parenting process and helping make that happen, not trying to replace the parenting process. And so we really need to be helping parents learn how to disciple their children. And I do think that that's a key. Do you view your parenting role as a discipleship role? Do you have that same perspective with your children? And I think that that is really critical and what we're really called to do. And I think that that is a good way to make sure that your kids are, biblically kind of focused. Now, the other thing too, candidly, is that, if your children are going to honor you, then it's important that you be honorable, because it's more honorable. It's easier to honor somebody who's honorable. And do you really look at that fifth commandment actually, not just for your kids, but for yourself? In other words, I want to make it easy for my children to live out the fifth commandment. So in order to make it easy for my children to live out the fifth commandment, I need to be a person who's honorable in a biblical context. Is that how you think about what you do? Is that how you think about the way that you parent? So it's a mirror that reflects out and a mirror that reflects in. We should be discipling our kids, helping them live out the fifth commandment. Every ministry should be supporting that. But also for ourselves, we should be saying to ourselves, am I an honorable father? Am I an honorable mother? Am I making it easy for my children to live out the fifth commandment? And am I seeing my role primarily with my children as a discipler, right? Because the great commandment is for our kids. There are near ones. The great commandment is that way. So, that's an insight I give that I think is just critically important in the parenting process, especially in the days that we're living now. We have so many factors that are trying to pull our children away from Christ. It's important for us to pull them near to be disciples for us, disciples for Jesus Christ, rather.
Amen. All right. Well, here's another good question. This one is talking about pregnancy resource centers. Roland, so right up your alley here. This viewer wants to know, how exactly do they minister and share parenting and adoption information as a pregnancy option for women who are in crisis? How does that work?
Yeah, so what typically happens is that, folks will find us either on the internet, or a lot of it's word of mouth, someone else who's been helped by a pregnancy center. And then there are teams at the pregnancy center that bring the client in, and they offer her compassion, hope, and help. And as I said, we really try to get the guys involved as well. And in that process, you want to kind of meet them at their point of need and give them the life-affirming options, because obviously they're coming to pregnancy centers because they're considering abortion. And so we want to make sure that we're giving them the life-affirming options. Life decisions need life support, and the life support is you giving them that perspective, that God-honoring perspective. We try as early as possible in that process to have biblical conversations with them, transforming conversations. We don't want to hide the gospel under a bushel. No, we want to make sure that we are trying to have those kinds of conversations with them on the front end. And so that's what you do. You kind of talk to them, meet them at their point of need, try to understand why they're facing this pregnancy decision, and then try to surround them with as much support as you possibly can. And obviously the guy is one of the key support mechanisms, because he can be an advocate for the abortion, or he can be an advocate for the birth. And that's the reason why you want to bring him in and try to help him understand what's going on inside of her. And a key transitional point for so many folks is when they see the ultrasound, especially for men. Men are visual rather. So a man, when she gets pregnant, nothing changes him. He's eating the same stuff he's been eating at the same time. For her, everything's changing. Her body's changing. For him, a man has to start to birth a child in his mind, right? So he has to start believing fatherhood begins up here for men, in their head at conception. And so when they see that ultrasound, it basically helps them put a visual connection to what's happening inside of her. And that's a critical piece too. And so that really brings you to the point where now they can make the life affirming decisions, whether it's certainly we try as much as possible to have, married parenting, couple parenting, that kind of role, at least from that perspective. But adoption is also one of those life affirming options that's out there as well. So you introduce all these perspectives to them and you love them. And candidly, the reality is, regardless of what decision they make, we're still called to love them. And that's the deal. So even they make the abortion decision, and this is one of the things the other side never talks about. You don't make the abortion decision and you head back to a Planned Parenthood with your baby, they ain't got nothing for you. You make the abortion decision and come back to a pregnancy center and they still love you.
That's right.
Because they know that you've made this decision. And just like Peter, who aborted Jesus when he was sitting by the fire, right? Because abortion is an act where you reject the life that you see. And that's what he essentially did there. I don't know you. 3 times, boom, 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 boom. Well, what we do then, just like Christ did when he restored Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Well, it's the same perspective that we have for folks who make the abortion decision. We love them anyway, regardless of that, because God is not done with them. He'll use whatever pain came from that abortion if they put it in his hands to become disciples, to be ministers. And some of the most effective and passionate people that I've met doing this work are folks who actually made the abortion decision and, like Paul, are out telling other folk about Christ because they've been transformed. They were chief sinners in this particular area of their life, and so they're empowered to transform folks by the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Out of the centers that I've started, the ultrasound is a big deal. I think it's 80 to 90% of the people that see the ultrasound decide to keep the child. Then there's prenatal care. They teach them all kinds of things. They help them with morning sickness. There's just a wealth of services. And we even have what we call post-abortion counseling, that if people have gone through an abortion, many of them are dealing with guilt, not only the women, but men too. And sometimes there's men that don't want the abortion and they don't have a choice and they are grieving over it. So we have it for men and women, and these pregnancy centers are a huge resource. It's really good.
Well, absolutely. And the post-abortion care, we have a ministry called Forgiven and Set Free. It's actually the most widely used post-abortion ministry resource for women. And we're developing a new one called Reclaiming Fatherhood, which actually we're going to release at the men's conference at Dr. Tony Evans Church on March 3rd and 4th. So you can go to Called in Mission to sign up for the men's conference, the men's summit rather. We really want to get as many men as possible in Dallas, Texas. And a key part of that is post-abortive healing for men.
All right, Roland, I'm going to have to break in because we're just about out of time. And we've got CTN that carries this on their network, and so we're time sensitive on that, and we want to thank CTN, but we also want to thank you, Roland, and thank you for what you're doing. I thought that you brought out some awesome things, and hopefully people will go to your website, and especially churches will take advantage of these resources that you have. That would be just awesome. So we do this every Monday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and we would encourage you to join us. We have people just like Roland on here. We've had Glenn Beck, we've had governors, we've had politicians, we've had just everybody. It's a wealth of information, and our website, you can go back and look at all of those archived editions. It would be a real blessing. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Roland. God bless all of you. Good night.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net